Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tearing down that shiny, statuesque image of Roman military might you usually see in the movies, and we're going to look at what life was actually like on Hadrian's Wall. You know, we always picture these stoic soldiers in gleaming armor confidently holding the line. But honestly, the truth is far dirtier, way more miserable, and, well, absolutely fascinating. To set the stage here, there's this famous line from the poet W.H. Auden that really captures the misery perfectly. He wrote about having lice in my tunic and a cold in my nose. But as we dig into the latest archaeological evidence, you're going to see that the reality was actually much, much more unsanitary than just a simple cold. And that begs a really fascinating question. With fierce, rebellious tribes looming to the north, what was actually the greatest daily threat to the troops stationed on this massive border? Well, stick around because the answer is definitely going to surprise you. All right, let's jump into Section 1, the Grand Frontier. So, initiated by Emperor Hadrian back in AD 122, this frontier actually had a surprisingly turbulent history. I mean, it didn't just stay put. By AD 138, the border moved even further north to the Antonine Wall up in Scotland, which, get this, was built entirely out of turf. But that little experiment, it only lasted about 20 years. The Roman military completely abandoned it and fell back to Hadrian's Wall in AD 158. And from there, they fiercely contested, held, and repaired this original line for nearly 300 years, dealing with some major tribal attacks along the way. Now, the sheer physical scale of this project is just staggering. The wall itself stretched an incredible 73 miles, or, if we're using their measurements, 80 Roman miles. It cut right across the rugged landscape of northern Britain, stretching from Wallsend on the River Tyne in the east all the way to Bonus-on-Solway out west. Think about that for a second. For a marching soldier, that is literally days of hard travel just across from one end of your own defensive line to the other. And looking at the blueprint of this frontier zone, you realize pretty quickly that it wasn't just a simple wall. It was this deeply layered, incredibly complex military system. Let's break it down real quick. First, you had the main wall, which was initially planned to be stone in the east and turf in the west. Second, they built these guarded gates called mile castles, exactly every mile, with 2 observation turrets squeezed in between each one. Third, right in the middle of construction, they actually had a major change of plans and decided to add 14 full-scale forts right astride the wall. And finally, the vallum. This was a massive rear defensive earthwork ditch designed to protect the whole frontier zone from the south. Moving on to Section 2. Builders and the garrison. Okay, so there's a really crucial distinction we need to make about who actually built versus who manned this colossal structure. On one side, you have the elite legionaries. These guys were Roman citizens, the highly trained engineers and builders of the wall. But they only stayed for the construction phase, maybe 2 or 3 years tops, and then they packed up and left. On the flip side, you have the auxiliaries. These were non-citizens, recruited mostly from the northwestern provinces. They were the absolute workhorses who formed the permanent garrison. They were the ones who actually lived, guarded, and, ultimately died at these remote, freezing forts. Let's take a closer look at those legionary builders for a second. These guys were heavily armed with some of the most advanced kit in the ancient world. We're talking lorica segmentata, that iconic articulated iron plate armor, a curved rectangular shield called a scutum, and that famous short stabbing and slashing sword, the gladius. They also carried the pilum. This was a brilliantly designed heavy javelin with a thin iron neck. The idea was it would intentionally bend when it stuck into an enemy's shield, making it totally impossible to pull out. But here is the ironic part. When these elite soldiers were doing the agonizing, backbreaking work of actually hauling stone and building the wall, they often just ditched all that legendary heavy armor and worked in their tunics or even just loincloths. All right, Section 3, the native Britons. So we've talked a lot about the Roman military machine, but what about the people who were already living right there in the shadow of this massive new wall? Well, the Roman military often had a pretty arrogant, dismissive view of the locals. Take a look at this text from a famous ink-written wooden tablet found at the Vindolanda fort. The Romans referred to the native population as Britannuculi, which literally translates to wretched little Britons. Ouch, right? But the truth is, the landscape they were occupying was anything but some empty barbarian wasteland. In reality, this region was home to massive, highly established confederations like the Brigantes and subgroups like the Tuscoverdi. These people lived in sophisticated roundhouse farmsteads and had been successfully farming these wide open landscapes for centuries before Rome ever showed up.
they were also master artisans. They crafted incredibly intricate cultic metalwork, like the stunning gilded bronze Izika brooch. And this is key. They weren't just passively conquered subjects. They actually likely sustained the massive Roman army by supplying the essential food, the raw materials, and eventually even their own manpower as auxiliary recruits.
Which brings us to Section 4, the microscopic enemy. Now we are going to zoom all the way into a microscopic level to find the ultimate narrative twist of this explainer. Just recently, researchers from Cambridge and Oxford universities made a fascinating, albeit slightly gross, discovery. They excavated a 3rd century communal latrine sewer drain at the Vindolanda fort. By carefully analyzing 50 different sediment samples taken along this 9-meter drain, the dirt revealed a pretty shocking biological reality for the troops stationed there. Get this. A massive 28% of those latrine samples contained the eggs of debilitating intestinal worms. That is over a quarter of the samples. This basically proves that despite having all that highly celebrated Roman engineering, the communal toilets, the running bathhouses, the intricate sewer systems, their sanitation was actually incredibly ineffective at stopping the widespread transmission of disease. And we're not talking about tiny little nuisances here. The parasitic culprits included whipworms, which were about 5 centimeters long. But wait, it gets worse. They also found roundworms, which grew to a horrifying 20 to 30 centimeters in length. Yeah, literally up to a foot long. These parasites spread directly through food, water, or hands that were contaminated by human waste. I mean, just imagine being an auxiliary soldier, standing out in the freezing rain, trying to defend the literal edge of the known empire, all while suffering from severe nausea, cramping, and malnutrition because a 30-centimeter worm is living in your gut? No thank you. To make matters even worse, using advanced biomolecular techniques, scientists also found traces of Giardia duodenalis. This is a microscopic protozoan parasite that causes severe outbreaks of dysentery. It leads directly to dramatic fatigue, severe dehydration, and extreme weight loss. In a densely packed, incredibly crowded military fort, just imagine a summer outbreak of Giardia spreading like wildfire through the communal drinking water. It would have drastically reduced the physical fitness, the morale, and the sheer fighting capacity of the entire garrison. So here's the crucial takeaway, and it brings us to our final thought. When we picture the mighty Roman Empire holding the line against fierce tribes on Hadrian's Wall, considering the debilitating, microscopic biological warfare going on inside their own digestive tracts day after day, we really have to ask, with enemies at the gates and microscopic invaders within, who really conquered whom on Hadrian's Wall?